Dan Kelly's the president of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. He joins me from Toronto. Dan, thanks for taking time to speak with me again today. We've had a chance to touch base a number of times. And I guess this financial aid package from the federal government, it can't come soon enough for some of your 110,000 members. They have a serious crisis of confidence. What's happening?
You know, we did a survey of our members over the weekend, and we found that over half have already been affected, negative sales, as a result of the COVID crisis and the economic effects of that. Of course, since then, we've had governments move to close numbers of businesses across the country, certainly those in the service sector. So it is getting big, growing by the minute. The most alarming statistic we collected over the weekend was, though, that 25% of our members said that they would be able to last for no more than a month if they had a big drop in sales. And by big drop in sales, we meant cutting in half of your sales. We're already there for a number of businesses that have seen those kinds of effects. And now, if this drags on for many more weeks, we will see huge numbers of business closures. We're already seeing big numbers of business layoffs of staff, cutting of hours. Store after store is just shutting her down for a period of time. How many of those will be able to reopen is really the big question.
All right. So what are you and your members watching for in this announcement today?
What we want to see the federal government do, they did some measures on EI which were helpful in the last round. Those are, of course, for people that are in quarantine to help them out with immediate EI sick leave benefits. That was a good step. The step that we need to see right now is governments taking over the wage bill of Canadian small and medium-sized employers, at least, perhaps Canadian employers at large.
Well, what does that mean?
So in Western Europe, the program that I've looked at the most intently is Denmark's. Government says if you can hang on to your employees, government will pick up 75% of the wage bill, and you'll come up with 25% during the crisis period, up to a maximum of about 5,000 Canadian a month. That's close to the EI insurable earnings, but that would ensure that employees are whole, but employers are relieved of their wage bill, which for many of them is their largest single expense.
Which sectors need the most help, and what precisely do they? I mean, you've described some of it. Is that the single biggest thing the government can do for some of these hard-hit sectors? Let's start by telling me who's really facing hardship here.
Yeah, the sectors that are hit the hardest by this are those that are going to have the effects of social distancing. And so that's the service sector, particularly personal services. I mean, there's a whole bunch of professions out there where you actually have to physically touch the customer. You think of a nail salon, a hair salon, all the personal services, chiropractors, dentists, etc. There are mass cancellations. Tourism would be another big sector. Hospitality was the hardest hit. That's restaurants, hotels, bars. But retail, over half of our members in retail have said that they've been hit really hard. Those are, where there's face-to-face contact with the customer is a big deal. And I know many people, particularly those in government, say, well, why can't everybody just work from home and telecommute? About half the economy, that's pretty much impossible. In fact, 42% of our members said that if they're not able to see a customer face-to-face, they will have zero sales, not 10% sales, right. Zero sales.
You touched on tourism. We're also expecting some kind of a deal on the border between Canada and the United States to basically shut it down for anybody but non-essential travelers. So visitors, tourists, they'd be gone too. Tell me about that effect.
Absolutely. Well, look, that was already happening several weeks ago for tourists from Asia. Of course, now additional measures for tourists from Europe and elsewhere. People are not wanting to travel so I'm not sure how big an effect the actual border closing will be, because we're just not seeing that. So I don't think that measure is going to deepen the problem, but my goodness, this is for that sector. We've got lots of hotels that have 4% occupancy rates right now, and many of the people that are there because they feel like they're trapped.
Right. So in terms of, I mean, we've seen a lot of these stories that some employees who work for small businesses who've had to be laid off or in self-isolation, some have worried about being paid. You're suggesting that's really where the government can dive in today and say, look, we'll pick up 2/3 of that, or sorry, 3/4 of that wage bill, and so that we don't. I mean, we also got to look forward to what happens when this passes, right? I mean, how do businesses get back on their feet if they haven't been able to hang on to some of those employees?
You're absolutely right. In fact, and that's one of the reasons why I really like the idea of the temporary assistance. If it's flowing through the employer gets the wage subsidy from from the government, and then passes it on to the employees. That's fast, because the EI system at the best of times is not going to get money back to Canadians as quickly as an employer might, who already has direct deposit for most of their employees. Secondly, the benefit is, after this is over, after the emergency phase, the relationship between the employee and the employer is still there, so they can be put back to work right away. If you have to lay them off, many of those workers may not return to that same employer, and the recovery will be much, much slower. Another reason in favor of a government support for wages, not to subsidize the business, but to subsidize the wage bills, so that the employees can get paid. Many of our members are saying they want to keep their employees. I talked to a heartbreaking scenario in Montreal yesterday, one of the oldest restaurants in Montreal, employees that have been there 30, 40, 50 years in good times and in bad, and the employer says he has no revenue, and will not be able to keep some of these employees on more than a few days.
Let's finish on this. You and I have talked about possible tax changes coming. The Prime Minister's hinted at that. What do you need to see?
Well, for one thing, the government needs to stop the tax increases. I think we have to remember that on April the 1st, the carbon tax in 5 provinces, the federal carbon tax, is set to go up. I get that there's a concern, of course, about climate change. Right now, we have other policies, COVID, that is taking care of carbon emissions right now in Canada. Please, I urge the federal government to at least cancel the tax hike that they have planned for April 1. Beyond that, allowing businesses to keep the float from the taxes that they've already collected. That's payroll taxes like CPP, EI, GST, HST. Allow them to hang on to that money, at least temporarily, to be able to pay some of their bills through the emergency phase of this. Extending tax deadlines, as they did with personal income taxes, that is a good move, and we need to see that for a broader range of taxes across the country.
All right, Dan Kelly, also always good to get your input on these situations. Thanks for talking to me today.
Anytime.